I received a review copy of Shadow the Erdtree, so I played it prior to its release on June 21st. I really liked how the DLC made me feel like I was playing Elden Ring for the first time again. The new map gave me a sense of terrified wonder, and the Shadow Realm blessing system encouraged exploration and gave me that sense of progression experience with an early game character in the base game. I was ready to see people lose their minds over this experience. The game launches and, wow, some people have issues. This piqued my interest, and I've been thinking about it and discussing it with naysayers of the Scadutree Fragment and Revered Ash progression system. As a quick rundown, in the realm of Shadow, you find Scadutree Fragments and Revered Spirit Ash. They're used at graces to raise your level of Shadow Realm Blessing for your character with the Scadutree Blessing, and for your Spirit Ashes and Torrent with the Revered Spirit Ash Blessing. These blessings increase damage dealt and reduce damage taken while in the realm of Shadow, and here's a breakdown of the numbers on screen as of patch 1.12. This is a new system for Elden Ring and a new system for From Software DLC, with previous From Software DLCs generally being equivalent to endgame content. In Shadow the Erdtree, the enemies and bosses feel scaled around this system, with it being challenging for even higher rune level characters to adequately mete out the pain or take a hit, and less engaging with this system. This is where the system ties into the difficulty of the DLC, which has been a central point of debate since Shadow the Erdtree's release. Enough players felt that the difficulty of the DLC was too high, to the point of it reaching a mixed review status on Steam. This was met with others arguing that these folks weren't exploring and collecting enough fragments, which then spurred debate about the process of finding these fragments and so on and so forth. So I like to spend a bit of time taking a look at the purpose of the blessing system, its implementation, and the greater consequences of this design choice. And by the end of this video, decide if the system is really good or not. Let's get into it. Prior to release, Big M, aka From Software president, Elden Ring director, and masochist Hidetaka Miyazaki said in various interviews that Shadow the Erdtree was made as one large DLC to give that sense of scale and adventure felt in the base game. Related to this, he also reiterated that there would continue to be a challenging experience to give a sense of satisfaction for overcoming the various bosses and other obstacles. You know, the FromSoft thing. And Miyazaki continued stressing that, like the base game, there would be a freedom of approach and breadth of strategy, or a breadth of approach and freedom of strategy, whichever you prefer. Either way, the big takeaway is that FromSoft wanted to make this a new Elden Ring experience. They wanted to rebottle the lightning that was stumbling around and adventuring in the lands between, and the blessing system was implemented for this purpose. In the base game, many players got out into the world, followed the Graces to Stormvale, and got kicked in the ass by Margit and sent packing on hours of adventure and exploration, in which they found new weapons and leveled up. And then 10 hours later, they'd come back and show Margit their new tricks and get sweet revenge. But when it comes to Shadow the Erdtree, everyone's got characters that have endgame levels and equipment that won't really get more powerful with the available systems. So to recreate that early game experience, From Software jacked up the numbers on the enemies to make everyone feel like a newborn baby again, and provided the blessings to give a sense of progression by getting more powerful. I love this system. I think it absolutely recreates the early game feeling of getting your legs under you as you bounce around exploring and adventuring. I'd have 2 or 3 bosses lined up in my first playthrough, and if they gave me a hard time, I'd mark them on my map and come back later stronger and usually with a new weapon to try out. So I'm picking up what this system is putting down. It's making me relive that initial Elden Ring experience 2 years later with my lord. It's magical. But not everyone feels that way, and I think it's interesting to explore why the system didn't work for some people and interrogate other criticisms I've seen pop up. I think the reason so many folks had an immediately poor reaction to the difficulty and progression of the DLC is simply mismatched expectations. Like I said at the start, From Software hasn't done a system like this before. Previous DLCs were balanced to be an extension of the game's late game content without a new progression path. So I think a lot of new players went into Shadow the Erdtree with their endgame character, Their Elden Lord who took on God and won, and were surprised to be getting sliced up by a jabroni wielding barbed wire hula hoops. I spoke with some folks experiencing this and recommended getting more blessings, but they didn't really see the payoff for finding them. Note that this is prior to patch 1.12. From Software increased the initial ramp up in patch 1.12 and it pretty significantly addressed this particular experience. And I think this revised buff progression better captures the intent of the system, to simulate more significant early gains characters experienced in the base game. But there's another fundamental criticism I've seen that's interesting to explore, and it's that the fragments in Ash are not fun or fair to find. I want to start discussing this on the most detailed level and then zoom out. Most pointedly, I've seen the criticism levied that the inconsistent locations of these items is frustrating and maybe even unfair. It's true that there are a number of locations the items can be found. In the DLC, you can find these items at Statue America, tutelary deities, Michaela's crosses, corpses, shadow pot enemies, special enemy drops, just lying around on the ground, and probably somewhere else that I missed. As discussed, their function is to reward exploration and give a sense of progression. By having these key items show up in various contexts, it encourages exploration of all kinds, not just searching for crosses, deities, and churches. And to be fair, a large portion of them are located in these spots. I took a look, and if you only picked up the Scadutree fragments located at Statues America and Crosses, the most obvious locations, you'd reach a level 12 Shadow Realm Blessing. This corresponds with the patch 1.12 soft cap of 1.85 times more damage dealt and 0.54 times damage received, with further upgrades offering diminished returns. So placing these upgrades potentially anywhere isn't a punishment to make them harder to find, it's a reward for curiosity and thoughtful exploration. But in this video we've been looking at the Scadutree and missing the Elden Ring Forest, where this discussion about the blessing system gets interesting and ties into the greater design approach for the DLC. Exploring the details of the blessing system helps solidify for me that it makes one hell of a first playthrough of the DLC. But what about repeated playthroughs? What about in the context of someone picking up Elden Ring for the first time and playing the base game and DLC in their entirety all at once? The approach of creating a whole new map and making the experience feel like a first run in Elden Ring again with your beloved Elden Lord after a couple years sitting on your throne is incredible, but if you want to play through the DLC again, you'll either need to go into New Game Plus, start a new character, or have another character primed up to go into the Shadow Realm. I'm on my second playthrough because I did have another character ready to go, otherwise I probably would have gone into New Game Plus on my first character, where I'd keep the Shadow Realm blessings I picked up already. And I may do just that after this second playthrough, but maybe not right away. Even in New Game Plus, beating Radahn and Mohg is not an insignificant amount of content to play through just to play the DLC again. And for someone playing Elden Ring for the first time, putting 100 plus hours into their grand journey, does entering a new land where you're effectively starting fresh hit the same way? The concept of having a new map to explore in a way that recreates that feeling of a new playthrough is a really compelling one to me, but isn't that also basically describing a sequel? This line of thinking leads me to wonder if Shadow the Erdtree could have been a standalone expansion. I could import my character from the base game or have the option of starting a new character and jumping right into the realm of Shadow. This theoretical alternative is appealing because I find myself wanting to have subsequent playthroughs of Elden Ring and Shadow the Erdtree, but not necessarily at the same time. It's just a lot of content. And this is where I can better relate to those that argue that the blessing system falls down on repeat playthroughs when you're doing multiple new game runs. As it stands, you'll be doing a version of that for the Golden Seeds and Sacred Tears in the base game before hopping into the DLC, where you will then start another progression system that works similarly. Of course, this is specific to new game characters, as New Game Plus characters will keep their flasks and blessings, making me feel like that's the intended way to replay the DLC. This makes sense when you think about how the magic of the base game in the DLC was, for me at least, struggling against the great unknown of the world initially, getting into all sorts of adventures, and then slowly overcoming and conquering it. That magic can only really happen the first time you play the base game or DLC. which is why I think pursuing a design to recreate that experience was worthwhile, even if this discussion has illuminated some potential downsides to this design approach in the greater context of how Shadow the Erdtree fits into Elden Ring. As it stands though, the Elden Ring complete package with the DLC is such an incredible world From Software has created. An absolutely ludicrous amount of content alongside such an incredibly rich and intriguing world. For my money, I'd easily put Elden Ring as the best world in video games, especially with the addition of the Shadow the Erdtree, which for a guy called the Lore Hunter spends pretty well. And now we have but one final question to answer. Is the blessing system in Shadow the Erdtree good? This discussion has proven that this system both sings and sinks, depending on the context, and therefore each person is going to have to reach their own conclusion. For me, the blessing system was a key factor in recreating that fresh Elden Ring experience, and that is such a precious commodity that I can't help but appreciate it. It may not sing as beautifully for those experiencing all of Elden Ring for the first time with the DLC, in which case I'd suggest playing through the entire game first, and then playing Shadow the Erdtree when a new player gets that itch again. And it may become more of a nuisance on subsequent new game playthroughs, but I'd argue that patch 1.12 revised scaling makes it so that you don't really need to get every fragment to be at a very adequate power level in the DLC, especially when you've already gotten a run under your belt and know the enemies and bosses better. And they made it a non-issue for New Game Plus runs where your blessing level carries over. So I feel like From Software made a design choice that gave me something I value greatly and mitigated the downsides of it to a reasonable degree. Let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I know I had a lot of fun exploring it. This video is on the house today, but if you'd like to give a subscribe and tip me with a like, I'd very much appreciate it, as all forms of support help promote videos and give me the courage to wake up another day and talk some more about the wonderful game that is Elden Ring. Thanks for watching.